Hello and welcome to the Props Clear podcast. I'm your host, Jillian Angeline. We'll be talking all about drones and about improving public perception surrounding the unmanned aircraft. This is for informational, educational, and entertainment purposes only. None of this constitutes legal advice. So fasten your seatbelts and let's get started. Today's guest is Ron Leach. He's a public safety drone consultant, and he's a retired trooper with the New Jersey State Police. He was there for more than 2 decades. Now, for the Props Clear podcast, I want to be as interactive as possible. We got a note from a fan saying he was interested in hearing more about Part 107, the federal regulations, and all that information for beginners. And that's what we'll be focusing on this episode. First of all, you have so many drone Part 107 prep classes for students. Tell me about what that experience has been like.
It's been a really great ride. When you take somebody who has zero knowledge of aviation and then you start introducing them to the lessons and what they need to understand to become a pilot, watching that light bulb go off is really incredible when somebody finally gets it. It's kind of, it's a really great feeling sharing, my passion and what I have done for almost 30 years, or it's been 30 years this year, 30 years. Wow. 30 years of aviation, and introducing new people to this new technology. It's fun, a lot of fun. So when I bring someone in and start instructing them, I want them to understand that they are a pilot. At the end of the journey, you're going to be credentialed as a pilot from the FAA. You're not just a drone pilot. You are a remote pilot operating an aircraft in the National Airspace System. So drones, while they may seem like they're novel, they're not. You can hurt somebody. You can deviate and cause a problem for an airport. You need to understand what that role and responsibility is when you take on a flight. Once again, into the National Airspace System. Again, when I talk to my clients or students for the first time, just give them that understanding, and I think it kind of builds them up a little bit too. It's like, wow, I'm going to be a credentialed pilot. This is 107 training is just that part of the regulations, FAA regulations. 107 pertains strictly to drones. Part 91 for general aviation pilots, 121 for airlines, and 135 for commercial operations like tour helicopters. 107 just covers that part specific to drones. But there's a lot of overlap with the different aviation regulations, and I try to get my students to look at that as well. Why does this rule pertain to me but not other aircraft? And where can I find something similar? What's the FAA's thinking on this rule that I have to follow?
And there are so many different aspects that you have to know in order to take this test. 60 multiple choice questions, you have to pass with a 70. It's not something you can study overnight. I got my Part 107, my first one back in 2018. I've kept recurrent. You have to take recurrent, exams that are now online every 2 years. But when you first take that test, it probably was a 40-hour study session, not in one day, but over a long period of time to be able to learn the concepts. As you said, you want to learn to, learn how to fly and not just learn how to memorize something for a test on one day. A lot of different topics to cover, things like airspace, things like weather, knowing how to read METARs, crew resource management. You may not think something like CRM is important. It's a very key part of not just the test, but of when you're working out in the field, whether you work by yourself or when you work with a team of people. Also, other considerations are the physiological aspects of what you can or can't do with your body before you hop on those joysticks, like the whole 8 hours bottle to throttle concept, like you would a normal pilot. In a lot of ways, people think, it's like just playing a video game. It's not. You are flying an unmanned aircraft in airspace with other manned aircraft. I live here in northern New Jersey. If I want to lift off my drone, which I've done near me, I'm flying near, NYPD helicopters. You're flying near planes that are trying to land at the 3 major airports here. Lots to consider to be able to make sure that you stay safe and the drones themselves, don't injure other people.
Definitely. You covered a lot of topics there. So the question bank for 107 is over 730 right now. It's a question bank, right? There's a whole different sections. You have weather, you have airspace, you have charts, you have physiology, you have crew resource management. All that stuff is important to understand before you get into it. what I do tell my students, when I'm giving a class, I said, you're going to do this just for the test. All right. Understand it. This is a formality, but there's other areas that are relevant to you as well. So when the FAA created the 107 rules, they had nothing to go by other than manned aviation rules. So they adopted a lot of standards from Part 91 that really don't, it shouldn't impact drone pilots, right? Like density altitude. I find, again, my opinion on that. Why would a drone pilot really need to understand that? Well, from an aerodynamic perspective, it's important to understand your aircraft won't perform as good on a hot, humid day at high altitude. So maybe there's some relevance there, but I try not to have my students worry too much about that stuff. I cover all the regulations. I want them to be, this is a learning process. I've been in aviation for 30 years, right? I'm still learning. I still have to go back to the books and look things up. And it's good for a refresher. So I've had students come up, take my class, and I'll be able to pass it. And they've sat for the exam and shelled out the 175 hours and came back with a 69. Well, guess what? 70's heavenly, right? But I don't want my students to get a 70. I want them to get in the 90s, right? No, there's different people that teach different ways. I just want the whole package to be delivered, not just the 107 stuff. How about privacy issues, right? If you're a real estate photographer and you have somebody coming up to you, hey, you're looking in my backyard. Well, be an ambassador to the industry and explain what you're doing. Maybe get a hold of the local police department before you go out on an assignment for your drone flight and say, hey, listen, here's who I am, here's what I'm going to be, and here's how high I'm going to be operating, and get the buy-in ahead of time. But it's really important to understand what your role and responsibility is, because if there's a crash, if you hurt somebody, if you disrupt airport operations, the FAA is not going to say, oh, you're just a drone pilot, we're not going to bother you. There's penalties. And when you're dealing with federal level penalties, they start at 5 figures.
Excellent point. Now, the FAA put out a study guide. FAA, Federal Aviation Administration, put out a study guide. It's dated 2016. I know you and I were talking before this. A lot of that information is relevant today, but even things that I studied back in 2018 have changed. Even in the last few years, they added rules and regulations and questions surrounding remote ID and what you can or can't do with remote ID. There's LINK that we were talking about, which is basically, I'm going to let you do that acronym because I'm blanking on that acronym right now.
Low altitude authorization and notification capability. Lance,
And
however
I've
you want to work it.
and I've done something similar. There are apps out there now where if you are in an area with a helipad near a children's hospital, or if you can't fly in a certain area at the moment, you can request a waiver off your phone. Pretty incredible that you can do that now. You can basically just go on your phone and say how long you want to be flying in an area. You want to request a certain region, and they give you a certain time period that allows you to fly in that area. That's a
Yep.
game changer, because I think early on you were trying to fill out paperwork, you had to send it in, you had to make phone calls. So this definitely revolutionized the industry for a lot of people, and I think they know that as the drone industry improves, people are going to be using it, and they want to make it as user friendly as possible. So I think, do you also discuss the changing regulations with your students?
So yes, I do. As a pilot, you want to stay on top of all the regulation changes, right? So let's think about night flights, right? Originally, when 107 came out, 107 pilots couldn't fly at nighttime, right? Well, now you can. The FAA is realizing that people are responsible, right? They're treating pilots as pilots. They're not saying, well, you're a drone pilot, we're going to give you special, access, whatever. We're getting into the realm of beyond visual line of sight, which is a capability that full scale aircraft have, right? So
Mhm.
the FAA is constantly learning, that they're looking at what's going on in the industry. They're listening to the professionals out there, which is great. So with the Lance capability, you want access to certain airspace. Traditional legacy pilots have to use radios, two-way communications, and they have to have certain equipment on board their aircraft as well, transponders, ADS-B out, different levels of equipment for certain operations. There are too many drones to incorporate that into that system. So Lance was developed as a way for drone pilots to use their cell phone to get access to the surface area of the larger airports, Class B, Class C, Class E airports that have clearance levels down to the surface. So as drone pilots, we're not supposed to talk on the radio. Emergency, all bets are off. You're going to tell any, you're going to make a broadcast, right? I recommend that my clients have an aviation radio to at least listen to, so wherever they're operating near an airport, they can punch in the frequency and hear where the traffic is flowing, right? So
Mhm.
anyway, with the Lance, instead of using a radio to call air traffic control, they're using an application that has pre-designated altitudes that the pilot can expect to get clearance to operate at, right? So
Mhm.
you're actually who you are, where you are, what you want to do, and how long you want to do it. Send it off to
Mhm.
the FAA. They'll review the request. They'll check with local air traffic control management to make sure there's no issues. If everybody's thumbs up, good to go, you'll get your code back, and it'll give you a little number that you want to make sure you keep track of, right? And then you can fly in that airspace. That clearance is only good for a window, though, so you get to conduct your business and then land once it's done. Speaking of air traffic control, there's another interest I'm involved with. It's a nonprofit called Ultra. It's the Urban Low Altitude Transport Association, and my partner in that, the executive director, is Ray Adams, coincidentally a retired air traffic controller out of Newark, one of the busiest airports in the country.
Mhm.
So hearing his take on the Lance authorizations is kind of evolved. So he wanted nothing to do with drones, and now he sees that they can integrate, and they're very comfortable at some of the major airports operating with drones. So that a little bit of a tie in there for something else that I do.
Oh, that's fantastic. I know you have so many different passions, but your goal from, talking with you seems to be making sure that everyone's on the same page about making the airspace safe for helicopter pilots, for commercial pilots, for pilots that are flying for fun, and then for the drone operators too.
Absolutely.
And I think something else that we talked about, you touched on it before, crew resource management. It's about making sure that you do the pre-flight checklists, making sure that you connect with the visual observer that may be with you, making sure that you're all on the same page. I was just taking a course all about using drones to inspect infrastructure
Mm-hmm.
at Valmont in Nebraska. And one of the things that we talked about in terms of CRM is making sure you're all on the same page about what signals and what phrases you're all using, because everyone uses phrases a little bit differently. So before you get onto an area, make sure your language is the same across one area. Is that true?
Yeah. So practice before you do, right? You don't want to go out there and learn on the fly, right? Let me say that one there, a little cliche, right? You don't want the operation to be the first time you're doing it. So you're going to get that common language down, and you get the expectation of working with the crew together. It's possible you can plug different people into different roles in an emergency, or it's better if you've worked with somebody first and then get the basics down. Hey, look, I'm the pilot in command. Here's what I prefer to have communication wise. Here's the information I'm looking for. Different pilot may have a different perspective of what they're looking for. Um, and I guess it kind of gets to different flight instructors that I've had over the years, right? You take a little from each one, right? So when you're standing up a drone operation, your CRM might be a little different than somebody else's, but that doesn't mean it's bad. Take a little bit of the good and integrate it into your program, right? And it may be, we don't need to do this procedure anymore and throw that out. But you want to have those standards developed before you go and fly a mission.
And then I believe I also mentioned weather. Weather is a big component of flying, especially when you're flying, commercial airlines that we all know and love, like United or Delta or American. But, weather also plays a role, even if you're flying, a smaller, DJI product. METARs are one of my favorite, actually, parts of studying for those exams, because I love being able to read. It's just a few letters, a few words, a few numbers. And basically, if you know how to read those, you know at what time weather observations were recorded, if there's scattered rain. I was just talking with someone who is tied with the severe storms group, who takes fixed wing drones out to analyze storms. And he said, even, their drones that are flying into severe storms and near severe storms, that rain still impacts some of their tubes in the drones and impacts the sensors that are trying to measure wind. So
Mhm.
even groups that are studying, weather, are their drones are impacted by what's happening up in the atmosphere.
Sure. So one of the first questions I'll ask my students is, where do you get your weather? Just generic. I like to engage my students. I want that two-way conversation.
Mhm.
You build that. Conversational is. I think people take the information more quickly, right? So I'll ask somebody, "Where do you get your weather?" Well, app on my phone. Okay, great. That's valid. Channel 6 Action News. I'll watch the weather there, right? Officially, it's the 1-800 Weather Brief, WX Brief from the FAA. That's the official source. There's a couple different official ones that you can get it from, but it's also, what the weather is for where you live.
Mhm.
Summer, you can expect thunderstorms at certain times of day, right? If you're in Florida, it rains every 15 minutes and then the weather changes, right? Different parts of the country, as humans, we understand the environment we live in, right? So when we got some bad weather coming in, like a nor'easter, the winds are going to be out of the east here for where I live in South Jersey, but generally the weather moves in from the west. So what's the weather? You understanding what it is, the environment you're in. Aviation weather isn't really geared towards low level flight because the weather reporting stations are pretty spread out, right? So what you have to do, not what you have, what's prudent to do is check the weather in a couple different locations and see what's trending in your area, right? You know when you look at the weather forecast, you'll have an idea if it's going to be sunny for the day, rainy, or whatever. Your aircraft is going to dictate what kind of weather you fly in. Some manufacturers don't, you can't fly in rain, you can't fly in snow, so there's limitations that way. Wind is probably one of the bigger components you want to pay attention to.
Mhm.
I do know of a public safety operator who flew downwind with their drone on a job and didn't have the energy to get back and ended up crashing a very expensive drone in the water. So, is weather important? It is. All right. Maybe not to the extent as full size aircraft, but it's important to you and your operation. Can I conduct this mission before this line of thunderstorms rolls through? Or, you certainly don't want to be exposed as a human to lightning, right? So, can it wait? What is it you're trying to do, and is the weather going to cooperate? That's just part of the whole decision making process before you launch an aircraft.
With remote ID, what are the regulations as it stands right now in mid October?
So with in 2021, the FAA came out and established a remote ID rule. In other words, you can't fly an aircraft in the National Airspace System 10 feet, whatever it might be, without remote ID on board the aircraft. It was either going to be done through software through the manufacturer, or it was going to be done with an aftermarket broadcast module that you would add onto your aircraft. Well, there was a shortage of the modules being produced. Legacy aircraft makers are already building in, DJI, Skydio, the other ones, they're already building in the remote ID compliance, right? So there's a shortage of the modules. There's a lot of drones out there that weren't going to be able to fly unless the FAA extended the enforcement portion of this. So in September of this year, they said, well, we're not going to be able to meet our deadline for enforcing remote ID. We're not going to enforce it for another 6 months to allow some of the remote broadcast module manufacturers to catch up with production and put them on the aircraft, make them available for drone operators. Basically saying we don't have the resources to enforce this compliance, so we're just going to push it back a little bit.
The other thing that is discussed, especially in the FAA Part 107 study guide, aeronautical decision making. They use the term ADM, but what does that entail? And I think basically it comes down to make smart, common sense decisions when you are flying your drone. Correct?
Correct. Yep. Just like with full scale aircraft, what's your decision making process to accept or reject a flight? What is your personal minimums? I'm not comfortable flying this aircraft farther than 1,000 feet from me. I'm not comfortable flying at nighttime. What are your personal minimums? That's where the aeronautical decision making. You're the pilot that's going to make that decision, right? What's your process for accepting or turning down a job, right? There's acronyms. I'm safe. There's the 3P: process, perform. It's a constant evaluation while you're flying an aircraft. It's not just static. You're not just going to fly out and back. You want to see what the systems are doing, right? Your aircraft is flying in the wind. It's yelling at you, hey, land immediately. Well, was the decision to take off prudent, or did something change with the weather that you weren't expecting? This is all part of the decision-making process, watching what your aircraft is doing, right? And how are you going to respond to it? And if your response, did it meet that, okay, is everything cool now? Am I good? Or I got to land this thing. Something else to think about too, one of the regs talk about updating your software for your drone.
Mhm.
If you don't update your software and have a problem, it could be considered careless and reckless operation, which can translate into a 5-figure large fine. Did you pre-flight your aircraft? That's part of your aeronautical decision making. Yeah, I did, but I forgot to update the software. Well, you're taking some responsibilities there that you probably should think twice about.
And it doesn't take long to update software.
No.
Often, if I'm in the field, especially, when I was a reporter for the AccuWeather Network, and you go and you're in the middle of trying to, you know, do 10 things at once, and you try and fly your drone and it says to update the software, you click the update button, it's doing its own thing. You can go and multitask on
Mhm.
something else that you need to do. It doesn't take a long time. And like you said, it may be fixing bugs or issues that you don't even know about,
Right.
that, the manufacturer may know about. That's going to help you have a safer flight. I think it really comes down. I know that I just finished an exam all about boating safety, and a lot of it's just straight up common sense. And I think that you can apply a lot of those common sense ideas to, flying drones. If you don't feel like it's a safe environment to do something, you don't fly. You may not get the shot that you wanted, but you kept yourself safe, your drone safe, and the people around you safe.
Absolutely. It's a learning process. It's not one and done with the test. As you fly, you gain experience. You can push the limits a little more for your what your comfort level is going to be, right? No different than full size aviation. You're a beginner. You crawl, you walk, and you run, right? The more comfortable you are, but don't get overconfident on the other side. How are you going to handle something that goes sideways? What are you prepared to do? How are you going to handle the situation? If you hurt somebody, you're going to have a problem, right? And again, this gets back to did I update my software? Am I running before I should be crawling? Again, it's a learning process. You want to find that groove there, and then just build upon that. And that's also going to you're going to make better weather decisions. You're going to make better aeronautical decisions. You're going to be a better pilot. You're going to be a safer pilot, and that's basically what the FAA wants. They run the national airspace system. You're a pilot that operates in the national airspace system. They don't want things bumping into each other. They don't want people to get hurt. Safety is really a key driver for the industry.
That's what insurance comes down to as well. You may want to have some sort of insurance on you. I know there are some people out there that allow you to have, you pay a certain fee. There's some companies out there that you pay a certain fee, you get some insurance for your drone or for, any damage that you may have caused. That might be something to consider, because even if you're like, oh, I have a lot of drones in my fleet or something like that, you also want to make sure that you are keeping yourself safe from any action that people take against you if there is damage that you could
Yep.
not prevent, correct?
That's what insurance is for. If you're going to be doing drone work as a business, you may want to have some other, you want to consult with how do you insulate your personal assets from what you're trying to accomplish with your drone, right? So you get insurance to cover the drone, but how do you put that wall between your personal finances and say you do have a mishap? Two kinds of pilots in the world: those who have and those who will, right? Accident or an incident. It's going to happen. You're going to bang a drone up. It's going to happen. How did you handle the situation? All these questions will come up. The FAA, if it rises to their level for them to come in and talk to you, they're going to want to see, were you being responsible? Did you make the right decision? Is the drone capable of the mission set you were going to fly? Keep in mind, they're flying computers. All that data is located somewhere. So if somebody wants to go and find it, it'll be found. Again, you have to take, to be 100% risk averse or safe, just don't fly the aircraft. But there's going to be inherent risk. How do you mitigate that? How do you manage it? And how do you learn from it, right? I mean, the FAA doesn't want to come down on you with a big hammer. They want you to learn. If you make a mistake, they have a compliance philosophy where it allows pilots to make a mistake and learn from it. Some of them are reportable, some of them aren't. It just depends on what the level is. And again, the FAA doesn't want to hammer people. That's not what they're in the business for. They want safety. They want to promote safe operations in the airspace. So if you're learning from mistakes, good. That's great.
Now, as a Part 107, you are basically a step above a hobbyist. If you're just a hobbyist and you get a drone for Christmas, which a lot of people have gotten over the years, you go fly your drone. You are not basically under a lot of these regulations. But I think, on a personal note, I think these hobbyists should be learning a lot of the things that we're talking about, because people go out and they do something beyond visual line of sight as a hobbyist. That's not going to be safe for anyone around them. But if you want to be able to make money or work with your drone, Part 107 is absolutely required. But what are your thoughts on hobbyists learning a lot of this information? Because basically they're sharing the same airspace as everyone else.
Yeah, it's interesting when the FAA came out with bringing hobbyists in. I see both sides of it. I see the young person getting a drone for Christmas or birthday or whatever that might be, or hey, look, I want to fly one, and kind of being a pain about it, with their neighbors. That's a problem. It's always going to be a problem. There's three types of people that you really are going to have to focus on. They're the clueless, careless, and criminal. Clueless don't have any idea they're doing something wrong, so you try to educate them, right? How do we do that? Well, there's some community-based set of rules out there for hobby pilots to fly under. As long as they're flying within their community-based set of rules, they're fine. The FAA doesn't care about you. All right, you just got to register your aircraft over a certain weight. If you go outside of those community-based set of rules and start doing things you're not supposed to, then you become purview of the FAA. That's where they can take enforcement action. You can't say, well, I'm a recreational pilot. It doesn't work that way. You're not adhering to a set of rules that are best practices for hobbyists, right? Careless are people who know better but do it anyway. I'm going to try to get that shot. Nobody's going to know. The president's in town. They're not going to see my aircraft over here. They're not watching for me, right? President Biden's in Delaware quite a bit, so we see a TFR that covers a lot of South Jersey. When President Trump was in office, it pretty much shut down all of North Jersey. So in a TFR, it applies to all aircraft, hobbyist, 107, right?
Can you tell me what a TFR is for people who may not know?
Temporary flight restriction. So that's important to understand that you can't launch your aircraft either under hobby rules or 107 without certain authorizations, right? You may not even be able to fly at all. Public safety can get some exemptions to that within certain limits laterally from where the president's going to be.
And you may ask, how the heck am I supposed to find a TFR? There are a lot of apps out there that within your fingertips, with a couple of taps, you can tell where you can or cannot
Yep.
fly, especially after hurricanes. If there are search and rescue operations going on, when I was down covering the aftermath of Hurricane Ian last year in Florida, there were large swaths that didn't let you fly because the U.S. Coast Guard was doing operations.
Mm-hmm.
Like you said, the U.S. president, very important to think that, if the US president is around, there's going to be a temporary flight restriction. When the UN General Assembly was meeting a few weeks ago in New York City, large area here, northern New Jersey, New York City, pretty much stretched quite a number of miles, basically said you can't fly. It was just red on all the apps
Mm-hmm.
that you can check airspace on, correct?
Yeah, so before you fly is a free app from the FAA that'll tell you in real time where you're standing, if you can fly or not. Now, here's a question that comes up. Are they going to be able to catch me if I fly? And my answer to that is probably not. How you're going to get caught is you're going to make a mistake and you're going to come to the attention of the FAA and say, you should have known better. That's pretty much how it's going to happen, right? The closer you get to a VIP or dignitary, they're going to have some measures to see who's out there, whether it's fixed wing or drones or whatever. You're not going to get away with it the closer you get to a VIP. Other ones, like you mentioned, TFRs for security, temporary flight restriction for disaster recovery. Out west, they're big because they have forest fires out there, and if a drone's flying around, they shut down tanker operations. So there's a couple of issues there. If you're media, you can get access to TFR areas under certain conditions. There's ways around that, and as you grow as a pilot in the industry, you'll start finding these avenues where if you need to get into certain airspace, the FAA will let you in with certain terms and limitations on that. But again, whether you're recreational or you're 107, and just to clarify something, if your operation in any way generates an income or some kind of this for that, I get something for flying for you for whatever. If there's any kind of exchange of value, it's a 107 operation. It's a for hire, right? And that's, you fall under the commercial application of 107.
We've talked so much about the seriousness and the gravity of Part 107, but I remember having so much fun studying for the test. And I know I have a good time when I do lift my drone off because, for a lot of people, you get to see things from a different perspective that you've never seen them before. And it's really eye opening to be able to get that bird's eye view in just a few seconds of liftoff. It's pretty exhilarating. I know it was a scary experience the first few times I lifted off my drone. Felt like I was sending my baby off into the atmosphere, but it was so much fun. And I think that it boils down to you can have fun if you follow the rules.
There goes my $1,000.
Yeah. Yes.
Those are all good points. When I talk to my public safety clients, when they realize, they see a mission set for drones being very narrow, but they find other applications. It's like having your own police helicopter or aerial observer in the sky that you can just deploy out of the trunk of a vehicle. We're in the next phase of aviation growth. If you think about where we've been since the Wright brothers, right? Airplanes, fighter jets, space shuttle, we're exploring other planets. This is the next iteration of aviation, and it literally puts it in the hands of anybody that wants to do it. It's financially obtainable to fly a drone and be a pilot in the National Aerospace System.
Thanks so much to Ron for sharing his insight, and thank you for listening to the Props Clear podcast. Be sure to follow to get notified about the latest episodes. If you have any topics or suggestions you'd like to hear about, feel free to contact me, angelswings.jillian@gmail.com. That's ANGELSWINGS.JILLIAN@gmail.com. I'll see you later.